Sophia's screams tore through the air as Blackwood's men dragged Thunder away, the horse's desperate whinnies matching her own cries of anguish. When both returned years later, transformed and unbowed, the entire town stood frozen in disbelief at the impossible reunion that would upend everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The estate of Harold Blackwood sprawled across the countryside like a testament to wealth and privilege. Manicured lawns, stables lined with polished wood, and a team of staff dedicated solely to the care of his prized horses formed the backbone of his equestrian empire. Among all his horses, one stood apart from the rest: Thunder, a chestnut stallion whose very presence commanded attention. His coat gleamed in the sunlight like burnished copper, his mane flowing like a silken banner when he galloped across the training grounds. Thunder wasn't just a horse, he was Harold Blackwood's pride, the living embodiment of his success and status. In the competitive world of equestrian sports, Thunder had become something of a legend. His graceful strides and powerful frame had earned Harold numerous golden trophies that now adorned his office walls. At every race, Harold would watch from the VIP stands in his signature gray suit and wide-brimmed hat, murmuring to his associates with unwavering confidence, "That horse is unbeatable." His guests would nod and smile, their expressions masking envy and admiration in equal measure. But fate had other plans. During a crucial championship race, as Thunder rounded the final curve with his characteristic power and grace, disaster struck. His front left hoof slipped on the damp track, and his magnificent body, nearly half a ton of muscle and speed, crashed to the ground in a cloud of dust. The crowd fell silent, and the commentators halted their enthusiastic narration. Thunder struggled to rise, but a sharp pain made him falter. Track assistants rushed to his aid while Harold cursed from his seat, his face darkening with each passing second. Hours later at the veterinary clinic, the diagnosis shattered Harold's world. Thunder had suffered a severe tendon injury. With rest and intensive therapy, he might recover enough to live a normal life, but his racing days were over. The news hit Harold like a physical blow. "How much will the rehabilitation cost?" Harold asked, his voice cold and calculating. "Several months of intensive therapy with specialized equipment and constant care. It won't be cheap, but it's possible," the veterinarian explained. Harold's lips tightened into a thin line. He wasn't a man accustomed to spending money on something that wouldn't generate returns. To him, a horse unable to race was like an engine without fuel, worthless. That same night, as the ranch employees retired to their quarters, Harold made his decision. He summoned two of his most loyal workers, men who knew how to follow orders without asking questions. "I want Thunder taken far from here. I don't care where, but I don't want him on my property," he commanded, his voice firm and unyielding. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances, but didn't dare question him. They knew that working for Harold Blackwood meant obeying without hesitation. So, after midnight, they drove a truck to the main stable where Thunder was resting. The horse, though exhausted from pain, raised his head at the sound of opening doors. Something in his eyes conveyed a mixture of confusion and sadness, as if he sensed what was to come. The men, unable to meet his gaze directly, carefully led him to the truck. One of them gently stroked Thunder's neck before loading him. "Forgive me, friend," he whispered. The journey was long and silent. The truck traveled down lonely roads, moving farther away from the estate and into increasingly inhospitable terrain. Finally, near a small stream in the middle of a desolate landscape, they stopped. They unloaded Thunder with care, but without saying a word. When they started the engine to leave, Thunder tried to follow them, limping noticeably, but the effort was futile. The men disappeared into the darkness, leaving the horse alone under a cloud-covered sky. At dawn, the landscape surrounding Thunder was as unfamiliar as it was inhospitable. He dragged himself painfully to the stream to drink. His reflection in the water showed a horse that no longer resembled the champion everyone had admired. His injured leg throbbed with each step, but instinct pushed him to keep moving. There was no food, no shelter, and his only companion was the sound of the stream. Thus, the magnificent thoroughbred horse that had been the pride of a millionaire was reduced to a vulnerable being, abandoned to his fate in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. The sun was just beginning to paint the hills gold when Sophia, a 19-year-old girl, left her small adobe house located on the edge of a valley. Her home was humble, with weathered walls and tiled roofs that barely withstood the rains, but it was filled with warmth. Despite the difficulties, Sophia always maintained a smile on her face. She had grown up surrounded by animals, and from a young age, her father had taught her that every living being deserved respect and care. Although her father was no longer with her, she continued practicing those values every day. That morning, Sophia decided to go to the nearby stream to collect water. Her donkey, Bruno, patiently accompanied her, carrying 2 empty jugs on his sides. Sophia, with her brown hair tied in a braid and wearing a somewhat worn blue dress, walked barefoot on the dirt path. Beside her ran Luna, a mixed-breed dog with large ears and a curious gaze. As she walked, something caught her attention. In the distance, near the trees that bordered the stream, she spotted a dark figure moving with difficulty. At first, she thought it might be an injured deer, but as she approached, she realized it was a horse that seemed out of place in this isolated spot. A horse? What is it doing here alone? Sophia murmured, stopping a few meters away. The animal was large, with an intense black coat that stood out even in the dim morning light. Its mane was tangled, and its body covered with dust and small wounds. Although its bearing was imposing, it was visibly exhausted. The horse's front left leg was swollen, and it limped noticeably as it tried to drink water from the stream. Sophia felt a knot in her stomach. She had seen injured horses before, but never one so majestic and in such a deplorable state. She took a step toward him, but the horse suddenly raised its head and backed away with a weak neigh, as if fearing it would be hurt. "Easy, easy," Sophia said softly, raising her hands to show she had no ill intentions. "I'm not going to hurt you." Luna, the dog, ran ahead and barked a couple of times, but Sophia stopped her. "Luna, don't scare him," she ordered in a whisper. Sophia remained still, carefully observing the horse. There was something in his gaze that deeply moved her. It wasn't just physical pain, but a kind of sadness that seemed to come from his soul. She decided she couldn't leave him there. "Someone must have abandoned you, but that doesn't mean this is the end of your story," she told him, as if the animal could understand her. With slow movements, Sophia took a piece of bread from her bag that she had brought for breakfast. She extended it toward the horse, maintaining her distance so as not to frighten him. The animal sniffed the air, hesitating, but hunger finally overcame him. He took a couple of wobbly steps toward her and carefully took the bread. "That's it, boy. You're safe now," she said with a gentle smile. Once she managed to get closer, Sophia examined the injured leg. Although she wasn't a veterinarian, she knew enough to notice that the inflammation was serious and that the horse needed urgent help. She looked toward the stream and then at Bruno, who was patiently waiting with the empty jugs. "It's going to be difficult, but I can't leave you here," she said with determination. Sophia improvised a kind of halter with the rope she carried for Bruno, and with great patience, guided the horse away from the stream. The animal limped with each step, but seemed to trust Sophia enough to follow her. The journey back to the ranch was slow. Bruno walked in front with the jugs, while Luna trotted to one side, watching the injured horse. Throughout the journey, Sophia spoke in a low voice, trying to calm the animal. "I'll call you Thunder," she said suddenly, remembering her father's stories about horses as fast as the wind. It's a good name, don't you think? When they arrived at the small ranch, Sophia led Thunder to the improvised stable where she normally kept Bruno. Although the space was limited, it was clean and had enough straw for the horse to rest. Bruno, generous as always, gave up his spot without complaint while Sophia brought fresh water and a blanket to cover Thunder. The young girl spent hours tending to the inflamed leg with warm water and herbs she had learned to use from her grandmother. She cleaned the wound with delicacy. The horse whinnied softly at the contact but didn't resist. He seemed to understand that Sophia only wanted to help him. "I don't know where you come from, but here nobody is going to abandon you," she told him while stroking his neck. That night, as the moon illuminated the valley, Thunder finally collapsed onto the straw, exhausted, but with some peace. Sophia, sitting next to him, felt a mixture of sadness and hope. She knew that caring for a horse in these conditions wouldn't be easy, especially with her limited resources, but she couldn't turn her back on him. "I promise I'll do everything possible for you," she whispered, before extinguishing the oil lamp. As the wind whispered through the trees, Thunder closed his eyes, feeling for the first time in days that he wasn't alone. Days passed slowly at the small ranch, and each one represented a challenge for both Sophia and Thunder. The horse that had arrived weak and fearful was beginning to adapt to the constant care from the young girl. His leg was still inflamed, and each step he took seemed to be a reminder of the accident that had changed his destiny. But the peaceful environment and Sophia's affection were starting to restore something he had lost: hope. Every morning, Sophia would rise before dawn to attend to Thunder. The routine was demanding: cleaning the wound, applying poultices with herbs she collected from the nearby hills, and making sure he ate enough to regain his strength. Resources were scarce, but she always found a way to take care of her animals. "Come on, Thunder. Today is a good day to try walking a bit more," she would say while holding the rope she had converted into an improvised halter. At first, attempts to make the horse move beyond the stable were frustrating. Thunder, although willing, would stop after a few meters, visibly limping. But Sophia didn't give up. Patient, she would speak to him with tenderness, stroke him, and encourage him to take one more step. "You know, Dad used to say that horses are like us. They need someone to believe in them so they can overcome fear," she would tell him while guiding him toward the nearby stream. "And I believe in you, Thunder." With time, those short walks began to bear fruit. The inflammation in his leg gradually decreased and Thunder regained some strength. Although he still limped, there was a different gleam in his eyes, a spark that reflected the impact of Sophia's care and affection. One afternoon, while collecting firewood to heat water, Sophia stopped to observe Thunder from a distance. He was with Luna and Bruno, who seemed to accept him as part of their small family. The young girl couldn't help but smile. Although she knew the road to recovery was long, Thunder's progress was proof that the effort was worth it. However, caring for Thunder wasn't simple. The expenses for food and medicine were beginning to weigh on Sophia's pockets. Her only source of income was selling eggs and milk at the town market, and with winter approaching, she knew sales would decrease. "I'm going to need help to get through this, but I'm not going to give up on you," she told the horse one night while brushing him with an old wooden comb. Thunder, as if understanding Sophia's words, moved his ears toward her and looked at her with those deep eyes that moved her so much. Sophia let out a little laugh. "Are you telling me you trust me? All right, but I also need you to do your part." The weeks continued, and the bond between them strengthened each day. Sophia talked to Thunder as if he were a close friend, telling him her dreams and concerns. "You know, I've always wanted to have my own animal refuge. A place where no horse, dog, or donkey is rejected. That would be nice, don't you think?" she would say while stroking him under his mane. Thunder would whinny softly as if responding. One day, during one of their walks to the stream, Sophia encountered Doña Clara, an older woman from town who used to stop by the ranch to buy fresh milk. Upon seeing Thunder, Clara was impressed by his bearing, even in his state of recovery. "What a beautiful horse you have, Sophia. Where did you get him?" Clara asked, approaching cautiously. "I found him abandoned near the stream. He was injured, but little by little he's getting better," Sophia responded with a mixture of pride and modesty. Clara observed the horse attentively. "This is no ordinary horse. This animal is of fine blood, I'm sure. Look at his body, his muscles, even now that he's thinner. Haven't you thought that he might have belonged to someone important?" The question left Sophia pensive. She had never considered that Thunder might have been more than an abandoned horse. His majestic bearing had always seemed special to her, but she had never imagined that he might have had a past different from any other injured animal she had rescued. Whoever his former owner was, they left him behind as if he were worthless, she said firmly. Now he's here, and that's all that matters. Clara nodded, but couldn't help feeling curious. "If you need help with him, let me know. My nephew works in the capital at a place where they care for horses like this one. Maybe he can give you some advice." Sophia thanked her for the offer, although inside she felt that Thunder no longer needed anything more than her care and affection. For her, the horse wasn't just an animal. He was a reflection of her own struggle to move forward despite difficulties. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the stars shone in the sky, Sophia sat next to Thunder, resting her head against his side. "I don't know what your life was like before you came here, but I promise you'll never be alone again," she said in a low voice. The horse, as if understanding, gently inclined his head toward her, closing his eyes with a tranquility he hadn't felt in a long time. In one of the luxurious properties of magnate Harold Blackwood, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted regardless of the cost, chaos reigned. Harold, 47 years old, was the owner of a successful chain of real estate and agricultural businesses, and his fortune had made him an influential figure in the most exclusive circles of the region. However, behind his elegant facade hid a ruthless man who valued everything solely in terms of its utility and benefit. That afternoon, while reviewing some contracts in his spacious office with wood-decorated walls and equestrian trophies, Harold was interrupted by his foreman, Hernan, a robust man with a serious expression who seemed uncomfortable upon entering. "Mr. Blackwood, we have a problem. We haven't found the horse." Harold dropped his stylographic pen forcefully onto the table and looked up, furrowing his brow. "What do you mean you haven't found Thunder? What kind of incompetence is this?" Hernan shifted uncomfortably. "We've searched the entire surrounding area of the estate, sir. The last we know is that after the injury he escaped toward the forest. We thought he wouldn't survive long in those conditions." Harold rose from his chair, his face reddening with anger. "Thunder is not just any horse, Hernan. He's the most expensive animal I've ever purchased. Do you have any idea what that animal represents to me? My reputation is at stake." Hernan tried to calm the situation. "Sir, it's likely someone found him. We can continue searching in the nearby communities." "Listen to me carefully, Hernan," Harold interrupted with a threatening tone. "That horse bears my name and my mark. I will not allow him to end up in the hands of just anyone. Do whatever is necessary to recover him, and if you can't, don't bother coming back." Meanwhile, at Sophia's ranch, days passed peacefully. The young woman continued caring for Thunder with dedication. Although he still limped slightly, the horse showed signs of recovery each day. His body, once covered with wounds, now looked stronger and healthier, thanks to Sophia's feeding and care. One afternoon, as she returned from walking with Thunder through the valley, Tomas, a neighbor passing by with his burros, stopped upon seeing the impressive black horse. "Wow, Sophia, where did you get that animal?" he asked with admiration, tipping his hat to get a better look. I found him abandoned near the stream. He was in bad shape, but little by little he's been improving, she replied with a mixture of pride and humility. Tomas crossed his arms, observing Thunder carefully. This is no ordinary horse, Sophia. He has the bearing of fine blood. He might be from some important estate. I wouldn't be surprised if someone is looking for him. Sophia felt a chill upon hearing that, but she remained firm. If someone wanted him, they wouldn't have left him in those conditions. To me, Thunder is no longer anyone else's. He's part of my family. Tomas nodded with an understanding smile, but before leaving, he gave her a warning. Just be careful. The owners of horses like this one aren't always kind people. That night, while feeding Thunder and stroking him under his mane, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about Tomas's words. The possibility that someone might come to claim him filled her with unease. I promised I wouldn't leave you alone, Thunder, she whispered with determination, and I'm going to keep that promise, no matter what happens. But in the nearby town, Hernan and two of Harold's helpers had already begun asking questions with a photograph of Thunder in hand. They roamed the streets seeking information. It didn't take long for them to find someone who had seen a humble young woman walking with a majestic black horse around the valley area. They say she lives in a small ranch near the stream to the south, one of the helpers informed. Hernan nodded with a mixture of relief and tension. He knew that facing Harold Blackwood with the news wouldn't be easy, especially because the businessman never accepted that something he considered his could be in the hands of others. Prepare the horses. We'll go to that place early tomorrow, Hernan ordered. That night, as the moon illuminated the ranch, Sophia stroked Thunder, unaware that the horse's past was getting closer to catching up with them. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Hernan and his men arrived at Sophia's small ranch. The fresh morning air and the peaceful landscape contrasted with the tension that hung in the atmosphere. After several hours of travel, they had found the place thanks to directions from neighbors. Although Sophia's ranch was far from the city, its strategic location near the stream and surrounded by mountains made it an ideal place for raising animals. Though of limited resources, the modest but welcoming country house was surrounded by trees that provided shade to the horses and animals in general, the perfect corner for Thunder to recover from his accident. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, and Sophia, who was in the stable attending to Thunder, looked up upon hearing the horse's steps approaching. Her first instinct was to remain calm, but something inside told her this day wouldn't be like the others. When she went outside, she saw 3 men mounted on well-fed horses, completely different from hers. At the head of them was Hernan, Harold Blackwood's foreman, a man Sophia had heard mentioned many times in town, but had never had the opportunity to meet. Hernan dismounted quickly and approached Sophia with a serious expression. His cold, calculating gaze examined her from head to toe, as if evaluating whether she was worthy of his time. Beside him, the 2 men accompanying him remained silent, observing the scene with apparent disinterest but without losing sight of Sophia. "Good morning, miss," Hernan began, his deep and authoritative voice. "We're looking for a black horse of fine breed. Have you seen it around here?" Sophia, who didn't know the men or their intentions, tried to stay calm, although a knot began to form in her stomach. "A black horse? Yes, it's possible. I found an injured one near the stream a few days ago. I've been caring for him, but I don't know anything about fine breeds. I only know he was in bad shape when I found him." Hernan observed her for a moment, as if trying to read her mind. Then he let out a sigh of frustration and said firmly, "That horse belongs to my boss, Harold Blackwood. It was on one of his properties but disappeared after suffering an accident." "Where is it?" The name Harold Blackwood made Sophia shudder slightly, though she didn't show it. She knew enough about Harold to understand that he wasn't a man of noble principles. In town, there were rumors about how he treated his employees and animals, and she never thought someone so cruel could be the owner of an animal as majestic as Thunder. However, she knew she couldn't surrender easily. If it's his, why did he abandon it in the forest, injured and without care? Sophia responded, keeping her gaze fixed on Hernan's eyes. No one who truly loves an animal would leave it in that state. I don't know why he did it, but it doesn't seem fair to me that they now claim him as if he were simple property. Hernan frowned, visibly annoyed by the young woman's firmness. That's none of your business. My boss is the owner of that horse, and that means it's under his right. If you found it, you return it. It's that simple. Sophia felt her heart beating faster, but she wasn't going to yield. She had cared for Thunder with dedication and affection, and she wasn't going to let them drag him back to a life of neglect. I'm sorry, but the horse isn't leaving here. I found him, I healed him, and now he's part of this place. I'm not handing him over to anyone. Hernan, seeing that the young woman wouldn't yield, took a step closer. His face hardened with frustration. Don't make this more difficult, Sophia. My boss has many resources and knows how to get what he wants. I don't want us to have to resort to more drastic methods. Hernan's words weren't empty. Sophia could see in his gaze that this man was accustomed to handling situations with force, but she wasn't going to be intimidated. Her response was calm, but firm. I'm not going to move from here. If Harold Blackwood really wants Thunder, he'll have to come face me himself. The air grew charged with tension. It was then that Thunder made his appearance. The horse, which had been resting near the shed, slowly approached Sophia, as if defending his territory. Although he still limped slightly, his imposing bearing and majestic presence didn't go unnoticed. With his eyes fixed on the men, he approached cautiously, but determinedly. This horse has more heart than you believe, Sophia murmured, gently stroking his neck, and I won't let you take him. Hernan, seeing the horse's reaction, paused for a moment, surprised by the connection between Sophia and the animal. However, he quickly regained his composure and stepped back. We'll see about that. Harold won't forgive this. This horse belongs to him, and he'll recover it, whatever it costs. Sophia looked at him directly without allowing herself to be intimidated. Then let him come to claim it himself. The men, without saying another word, mounted their horses and began to ride away, leaving behind a heavy air of threat. Sophia watched as they moved away down the path, but she didn't relax until they were completely out of sight. With a sigh of relief, Sophia turned to Thunder, who was now by her side. She stroked him gently without taking her eyes off him. None of this is easy, is it? But don't worry, I won't let you go. The horse, as if understanding her words, offered a soft whinny and brought his head close to her. Sophia smiled, feeling a deep connection with the animal. She knew that what had begun as a simple task of healing an injured horse had now become a fight for his freedom. The air had begun to calm after Hernan's visit and his men, but Sophia couldn't help feeling uneasy. The memories of his words and the latent threat of Harold Blackwood accompanied her throughout the rest of the day. As she walked alongside Thunder, who now seemed much more relaxed, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about what was to come. She knew that confrontation hadn't ended. It had only been postponed. In her small ranch, Sophia continued her routine, but a constant worry had settled in her heart. She knew that Harold Blackwood wouldn't stop easily. His money and power made him unstoppable, and if there was one thing she had learned from her humble life, it was that those like him were never content with less than what they wanted. Thunder's future was at stake, and she couldn't allow him to be taken. Meanwhile, in Harold Blackwood's mansion, the atmosphere was completely different. The opulence of his home, with marble columns and ornamental statues, reflected his ego and power. In his office, a crystal lamp illuminated the plans and documents scattered on the table. Harold, a 47-year-old man with an imposing bearing, sat behind his desk looking at a photo of Thunder. "It's absurd," Harold muttered, passing his hand over his face. "How could I let that happen?" Hernan had returned hours earlier with bad news. The search had been fruitless, and the young woman who had found the horse didn't seem willing to hand him over. Harold's frustration increased as he thought about the time and money he had invested in that animal. Thunder had been one of the most promising horses in his stable, a purebred horse that represented his status among other millionaires and ranchers. He couldn't afford to lose him, not for anything. "What do you want me to do, Harold?" Hernan asked, looking directly at his boss. "Should we simply go there and take him by force?" Hernan, a man who had been in Harold's service for years, knew that this type of action wasn't his style. Despite his fearsome character, Harold had always preferred more subtle strategies. "I think we should be more persuasive, sir. The girl is stubborn, but she can't ignore the law for long. And if she does, there are ways to make her understand." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "I need this resolved quickly. I can't waste more time on this matter. If that girl doesn't understand reason, I'll make her understand the hard way." At that moment, an assistant entered the office, interrupting the conversation. "Sir, there's someone at the door who wants to speak with you. He says he's the girl's lawyer." Harold frowned. "A lawyer for a girl who lives on a lost ranch? By what right does he think he can come talk to me?" However, an idea crossed Harold's mind. Perhaps this was an opportunity to resolve the situation in a way that would ensure there would be no more complications. He decided to hear what the man had to say. Minutes later, a well-dressed man with a perfectly adjusted tie and a confident attitude entered the room. "Mr. Blackwood, I present myself as the lawyer for Sofia Martinez, the young woman who currently cares for your horse, Thunder." Harold observed the lawyer with disdain but gestured for him to speak. "What does this girl want now?" "My client, Mr. Blackwood, offers you a proposal," began the lawyer with a calm and professional voice. "She is willing to reach an agreement, but she needs guarantees that Thunder will be treated with respect and won't be forced to work in inhumane conditions as occurred on your property. She doesn't seek money or compensation, only that the horse be in good hands." Harold remained silent for a moment, observing the lawyer, considering his words. Meanwhile, he thought about what losing Thunder really meant. It wasn't just an expensive horse, it was an extension of his image and power. If the girl didn't yield, it could become more complicated than it was worth. "All right, I'll talk to her," Harold finally said, his tone still authoritative, "but let her know that I won't let her have the last word." Back at Sofia's ranch, the young woman had already begun to doubt if her stance would be enough to face the pressure from Harold Blackwood. Her quiet and simple life had completely changed in the last few weeks. Concern for Thunder occupied each of her thoughts. However, when she saw Tomas return from the village, an old friend who had accompanied her in her early years, a new idea formed in her mind. "Do you really think they can take him from me?" Sofia asked, her voice trembling. Tomas, who knew her well, looked at her with understanding. "Sofia, you've done a lot for that horse. Don't let anyone make you feel less. If Harold Blackwood comes here, I'll be with you." Sofia smiled, grateful for his support, but she knew the battle wouldn't be easy. If she wanted to save Thunder, she would have to be willing to fight to the end. The tension between Sofia and Harold Blackwood was beginning to increase. Both were willing to do whatever necessary to get what they wanted. Sofia was prepared to fight for what she considered just, while Harold saw in the young woman a threat to his authority. Soon, the situation would reach its culminating point. But for Sofia, it didn't matter how many men or resources Harold put at his disposal. Thunder was already part of her life, and nothing or no one could separate them. The day had dawned gray and cloudy, as if presaging the storm that was approaching. At Sofia's ranch, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Although little time had passed since Hernan's visit, Sophia felt that the confrontation with Harold Blackwood was inevitable. The threat of his men still lingered in her mind, and the fact that he was willing to go so far for a horse like Thunder made her think that things would get much more difficult. Thomas had been with her all day helping with the ranch tasks, but he couldn't hide the concern on his face. "Sophia, this guy isn't just anyone. He's not going to be satisfied with you telling him you won't hand over the horse. This matter could get very ugly." Sophia nodded, though her mind was firm. "I know, Tomas, but I won't yield. Thunder has been a part of this place since I found him injured, and I won't allow them to take him away. Throughout my life, I've learned not to give up, and I won't do it now." At that moment, the sound of hooves interrupted the conversation. Sophia looked up and saw that a group of horses was rapidly approaching. Harold Blackwood was on his way, accompanied by Hernan and several more men. He wasn't alone. His presence was imposing, his face reflecting determination and arrogance. The air became even heavier, as if the storm that was forming was more than meteorological. It was the prelude to a confrontation that would change the destiny of all involved. When he dismounted from his horse, his eyes fixed on Sophia. His cold and calculating gaze showed not a hint of sympathy. "So here you are," he said with a grave voice. "Do you really think you can confront me? Sophia, I am Harold Blackwood, and what I want, I get." Sophia remained firm, though her pulse increased due to the proximity of the man who had threatened her peace. "You're wrong, Harold. I'm not a woman who yields to threats, and even less when it comes to doing what's right. Thunder is here because I cared for him, and I won't let you drag him back to that hell from where you abandoned him." Harold frowned but didn't let his anger overflow. Instead, his tone became softer, but equally dangerous. "You're playing with fire, Sophia. If you want to keep that horse, what do you plan to do? Fight against all my power, against everything I represent? The poor don't win battles against the rich, they never have." Sophia, without hesitating, took a step forward. "Perhaps I don't have your money or your properties, Harold, but I have something much more valuable: respect for what is just. And this horse deserves something better than what you offered him." Harold's men watched the scene in silence, clearly surprised by Sophia's courage. Hernan, who was at his side, looked at his boss nervously, aware that Sophia wasn't a woman easily intimidated. However, Harold didn't seem willing to back down. "You think I care what you think?" he said with a cold smile. "Nothing you have here is enough to confront me. If you really believe this is your territory, you're wrong. Perhaps you don't understand the magnitude of what you're provoking." Sophia, despite the pressure, didn't back down. "I know what I'm provoking. I'm defending what's mine, Harold. And if you need to use force to take it, then I'll be ready to defend myself. Thunder isn't just a horse to me. He's a being who deserves freedom, and if you don't see that, that's what makes you truly small." The silence that followed was heavy. Harold's men looked at their leader, waiting for a signal to act. But Harold Blackwood wasn't accustomed to being challenged so directly. For a moment it seemed he was weighing his options. However, the internal anger was growing. He wasn't accustomed to losing, and even less to being challenged by a young woman without the resources to confront him. "Well," Harold finally said, his voice now lower but full of threat, "if what you want is a fight, you'll have it. But don't be mistaken, I always win." Sophia, with her gaze fixed on him, responded with a firmness that made Harold's men pause for a moment. "I'm not looking for a fight, Harold. I just want you to understand something. The truth will always prevail. No matter how great your fortune or how strong your power, heart and justice can't be bought." Harold smiled, but this time his smile didn't have the usual confidence. "We'll see, Sophia. We'll see." At that instant, Harold's men moved closer, some with menace in their steps while others awaited orders. Sophia couldn't let Harold's words go unpunished. She knew this would be a crucial moment for her, for Thunder, and for her life. But something inside told her she wasn't alone in that fight. Though the road would be long and difficult, and though Harold Blackwood had all the power and resources on his side, Sophia was willing to fight to the end. Not just for Thunder, but for what he represented: dignity and respect for animal life. The sun began to hide behind the clouds as the confrontation between Sophia and Harold Blackwood reached its culminating point. Sophia's ranch, usually tranquil and peaceful, now felt like the scene of an imminent war. Around her, Harold's men remained alert, observing each movement, waiting for their boss to give the order to act. But Sophia didn't seem disturbed. She knew she was fighting for something much greater than her own well-being. Harold, with a look that reflected the disdain and arrogance that characterized him, took a step forward. "I'm not going to keep wasting my time, Sophia. This is your last opportunity. Do the right thing and hand over the horse without more resistance. If you don't, you'll regret it." Sophia, without taking her eyes off him, took a deep breath. "I'm not going to hand over Thunder. I've made a decision, and I won't back down. You're accustomed to getting everything you want with money and power, but you can't buy what you don't understand." Harold observed her in silence, almost amused by the young woman's tenacity. The fact that someone like her was willing to challenge him infuriated him, but also awakened something inside him that had long been dormant, a challenge that might not be so easy to overcome. For a moment, he seemed to doubt, but he quickly regained his posture. "If you think you're going to beat me, you're completely wrong. The law is on my side, and I have all the resources to take what belongs to me," he said, his tone hardened by anger. Sophia raised her head firmly. "Not everything in life is resolved with the law, Harold. There's something much more important than that. Respect for living beings, for those who don't have a voice. And Thunder has his place here with me." Harold took a step back, seeing that the young woman wouldn't back down. He turned to Hernan, his right-hand man, and gave him a subtle signal. Hernan, always ready to do what his boss ordered, pulled out a pair of written orders from his jacket and extended them before Sophia. "This is what's convenient for you to do, Sophia," Hernan said with a serious look. "If you sign these papers, Thunder will be yours forever. Harold guarantees you that there won't be reprisals. You just have to sign." Sophia looked at the papers being offered to her but wasn't impressed. She knew that Harold Blackwood's contracts rarely were what they seemed to be. Something inside told her that signature could tie her for life to his influence. "I'm sorry, Hernan. I won't be part of your legal games," Sophia responded, rejecting the offer. The tension increased. Harold, seeing that his attempts to intimidate Sophia weren't working, took another step forward. "You're right about something, Sophia. Not everything in life is resolved with the law, but I still have my methods." With an imperceptible gesture, Harold made some of his men move even closer. Sophia noticed the change in the atmosphere. The threat was no longer just verbal. Harold was ready to resort to force. "Wait," Sophia said with a voice that combined calm and determination. "What you're doing is an abuse of power. I won't allow that to happen. Whether by law or by my own courage, I'm going to fight for what's just." At that moment, Tomas's figure appeared from the shadows. The young man had been observing from the beginning, and although he didn't have the resources or power of Harold, his loyalty and courage were unquestionable. "Sophia is right, Harold," he said with a firm voice. "You can try to intimidate us, but you won't get what you want this way. This isn't your territory, and if you decide to do something, I assure you, you'll face more than you expect." Harold, surprised by Tomas's presence, frowned but didn't react immediately. The young man was nothing more than a peasant without power, without money, but his determination seemed invincible. He was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there was something that couldn't be bought: the will of a humble people. "This isn't a threat, Harold," Tomas continued. "It's a warning. If you continue forward, there will be consequences. Sophia isn't alone, and you won't destroy what we've built with your power games." For a moment, Harold seemed to doubt. He knew that if he opted for violence, it could be a much bigger problem than he was willing to handle. Despite his wealth, his influence didn't reach everywhere. There were limits to what he could do without attracting the attention of others. However, the arrogance that defined him didn't allow him to back down completely. "Enough," Harold ordered with a hard voice, looking at his men. "This matter is taking a turn I didn't expect. But let it be clear, Sophia, that the next time you interfere with my plans, there won't be warnings. This isn't a fight you can win." Sophia looked at him without flinching. Her heart was racing, but with an inner strength that was unbreakable. "The fight for Thunder has just begun, Harold. Don't be mistaken. Thunder is more than property to me. He's a life I've saved, and I won't let you destroy him for your ego." With those words, Harold, knowing he couldn't win today's battle, signaled his men to withdraw. Although Sophia's face showed determination, she knew this victory was only temporary. Harold Blackwood wouldn't give up easily, but at that moment, Sophia felt she had taken a crucial step to protect Thunder. The confrontation wasn't over. Harold, with his wounded pride, had made it clear he wouldn't stop fighting for what he believed belonged to him. But Sophia had also demonstrated that she wasn't willing to yield, no matter the cost. The air at the ranch had calmed, but the tension persisted. Harold Blackwood and his men had withdrawn for the moment, but his threat still hung in the atmosphere like a shadow that wouldn't disappear. Sophia remained in the same place where she had defied Harold, her chest agitated by adrenaline but without showing any sign of weakness. Tomas was by her side, still worried but with the hope that the worst had already passed. "You did well, Sophia," Tomas said, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with warm tones. "But it won't be that easy. Harold won't let this pass." Sophia nodded, looking at the place where Harold's entourage had disappeared. Thunder, who had been observing everything from a distance, approached his majestic body to her as if wanting to give her strength. "I know, Tomas, but I can't turn back. Thunder isn't just a horse. He's a life I've cared for and defended. And although Harold thinks he can resolve everything with power and money, I won't allow it." Tomas observed her, impressed by the dedication of the young woman. He knew that although Harold was a powerful man, Sophia had something he could never buy, the courage to fight for what was right. But Harold's words continued to resonate in his mind, and the doubt about what would happen in the future wouldn't stop tormenting him. "What will we do now? We can't stay here waiting for him to return. We need a plan." Sophia sighed deeply and looked at Thunder. It had been a long day, but she knew there was still much to do. Harold Blackwood wouldn't give up, and if there was one thing she had learned over the years, it was that the threats of powerful men didn't dissolve easily. "The first thing is that we must make sure Thunder is safe. I have to take him to a safe place where Harold can't find him so easily," Sophia said with a firm voice. "And after that, we must gather allies. We can't face Harold alone." Tomas frowned. "Allies? Who could help us?" Sophia smiled, though the smile was charged with a sadness she couldn't hide. "There are more people willing to fight for what's just than it seems. Harold has his money, but we have something he doesn't have. The support of those who know what it is to lose. Those who, like me, believe that money isn't everything." With determination, Sophia decided it was time to take the next step. She knew Harold Blackwood would take advantage of any weakness, and although she didn't have the resources of a rich man, she did have something much more valuable, the truth of her cause. Throughout the night, Sophia and Tomas prepared for what could be the final battle. They sought those who could be their allies, farmers, friends, and even people who, like her, understood the value of what truly mattered. It was time to show Harold Blackwood that Thunder wasn't alone and that Sophia's cause was stronger than any threat. When morning arrived, Harold Blackwood returned to the ranch, confident that Sophia would yield to his power. He didn't expect that upon crossing the ranch gate, he would find something completely different. A multitude of people who, like Sophia, weren't willing to allow such a selfish man to destroy what had taken so much to build. "Sophia," Harold said with a mocking smile while observing the number of people who had gathered, "you thought you could defy me with these people? They're just peasants. They don't know what it's like to fight against someone like me." Sophia approached with firmness, looking Harold in the eyes. "Maybe I don't know how to play your games, Harold, but I know what it is to fight for what's right, and I won't yield. Thunder is safe here, and I won't let you take him." Harold's face darkened. "We'll see, Sophia. I thought I could be reasonable, but now I see you're just stubborn. You think you can win? This isn't just a confrontation between you and me. It's a war that involves everyone." Sophia looked at him without fear. "It is a war, Harold. Yes. But it doesn't just involve everyone. It involves those who fight for justice, for life. And as long as you keep believing that money can buy everything, I assure you that you're going to lose. And this time, I won't give up." A heavy silence fell over all those present. Harold's men, who before showed confidence, began to waver upon seeing the unity of the villagers. Although Harold was powerful, at that moment, Sophia and her community represented something he couldn't control: the collective determination of a people rising for what they considered just. "You've made a mistake, Harold," Sophia said with a firm and clear voice. "Because although you believe that money and power are everything, there's something you can't buy: respect, justice, and the fight for what's right." With those words, Harold Blackwood understood that the battle was lost. The gaze of those present, the strength of the community, and Sophia's determination had defeated him. Although he retreated, his face reflected a mixture of rage and frustration, knowing that for the first time, someone had managed to beat him at his own game. Thunder, the horse that had been the cause of everything, remained at the ranch where he was finally free from Harold Blackwood's clutches. Sophia had won, but not only for her bravery, but for the strength of the community that had united in the fight for what was right. The confrontation had ended, but the message was clear: money and power aren't everything, and there will always be those who fight for justice. Sophia had demonstrated that heart and courage can defeat even the most powerful. The passing of years brought peace and prosperity to Sophia's ranch. The small town that had once witnessed oppression and abuses of power now flourished under justice and collective effort. Sophia and Thunder, the horse that had once been a victim of Harold Blackwood's greed, had achieved more than anyone had imagined in those dark days. The legacy of that fight, a battle that seemed lost in the face of a rich man's strength, became the story of a people who had learned to unite to defend what was just. Sophia, now an adult woman with a face marked by years of effort, remained the heart of the ranch. Thunder was no longer a young horse, but his nobility and strength still inspired all who saw him. By her side, Sophia had created a refuge for animals, caring for and rescuing those who, like him, had been mistreated or abandoned. Not just horses, but other creatures found in her ranch a safe place full of love. One day, while walking through the field, Sophia stopped in front of the old wooden house that had witnessed so many battles, both emotional and physical. The gentle wind moved the branches of the trees, and the sound of horses in the corral filled her with a deep peace. By her side, Tomas, her faithful companion, approached with a warm smile. Despite the years that had passed, he remained her unconditional support. "All of this, Sophia," Tomas said while observing the flourishing ranch, "is thanks to you, to your bravery, to your fight. We'll never forget what you did." Sophia smiled, but in her eyes there was a mixture of nostalgia and reflection. "What I did wasn't just for me, nor for Thunder. It was for all of us, for the community, for justice, and above all, for those who don't have a voice." The legacy Sophia had left wasn't just in the prosperity of the ranch, but in the transformation of the town. What was once a place of suffering, where lands and animals were subjected to greed, had become a refuge of hope where people helped each other and fought for a better future. Sophia, with her bravery, had changed the course of local history, demonstrating that a single act of courage could have repercussions that would last for generations. In the distance, one could see the field where Thunder peacefully grazed. Although his steps were slower, his gaze remained noble and full of determination. Sophia knew that despite the passing of time, he would always be the symbol of her fight. Together, they had demonstrated that not everything is bought with money, and that even in the face of the powerful, heart and integrity could prevail. The memory of Harold Blackwood had disappeared with time. After his defeat, and upon seeing how Sophia and her community prospered, he retreated to his own businesses, where his name no longer had the same influence. Although many remembered him as an arrogant and cruel man, it was the story of Sophia and Thunder that endured in the minds and hearts of those who lived in that town. Sophia Valiant, as many began to call her in honor of her bravery, had left an indelible mark. With time, Sophia passed the leadership of the ranch to the younger members of the community. Although she was no longer the young woman who had defied Harold Blackwood in the decisive confrontation, her spirit remained alive in every corner of the place. Tomas had also taken his place as counselor and mentor, ensuring that the story of struggle and resistance wouldn't be lost with future generations. The ranch, now a symbol of what it meant to fight for what was right, continued to flourish under the leadership of those who understood the importance of justice, solidarity, and respect for animals. Thunder, now old and wise, remained the flagship horse, the constant reminder of what had been achieved. The victory of the heart over blind power. Years later, Sophia, now an elderly woman, walked through the ranch with slow steps, but her face reflected a deep peace. She had lived a full life, a life of struggle, love, and justice. As she observed the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, she remembered the moment when it all began. She thought of her bravery, of the strength of the community, and of the love for animals that had guided her life. "It has all been worth it," she murmured to herself while stroking Thunder, who at her side seemed to understand every word. Sophia Valiant had left her legacy, and the world, although sometimes cruel, would always remember that the fight for justice doesn't stop, no matter how many years pass. And so, Sophia's ranch, along with Thunder, continued to be a beacon of hope, a story that transcended generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and justice will always prevail. 5 years after the confrontation that changed everything, Sophia's animal sanctuary had become renowned throughout the region. What had started as a humble defense of one horse had blossomed into a safe haven for dozens of animals rescued from neglect, abuse, and abandonment. The modest ranch had expanded with the help of the community, now featuring proper stables, paddocks, and a small veterinary clinic where local children came to learn about animal care and compassion. Thunder, now 10 years older but still majestic despite his gray-flecked muzzle, had become something of a local celebrity. Visitors would come from neighboring towns just to see the horse that had stood at the center of the legendary confrontation with Harold Blackwood. Children would listen wide-eyed as Sophia recounted the tale of Thunder's rescue and their stand against the powerful businessman, a story that had taken on almost mythical proportions in the retelling. "Is it true that 100 people stood with you against the rich man?" a young boy asked one summer afternoon as Sophia led a group of children around the sanctuary. Sophia laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Not quite 100, but enough. When people unite for what's right, It doesn't matter how many you are." Thunder, sensing the attention, raised his head proudly from where he grazed, causing the children to gasp in delight. His limp had improved over the years, though on cold mornings it would return, a permanent reminder of his past. That evening, as Sophia sat on the porch of her modestly expanded home, watching the sunset paint the horizon in strokes of orange and purple, Tomas approached with an unusual expression on his face. "Sophia," he said, his voice hesitant, "there's something you should know. I was in town today and I heard news." Sophia looked up, noticing the tension in her friend's posture. "What is it, Thomas?" "It's Harold Blackwood. His company has gone bankrupt. They say he lost everything in some bad investments. The bank has seized most of his properties, including his prized stables." The news struck Sophia with unexpected force. She had not thought of Harold in years, having put the confrontation behind her as she focused on building the sanctuary. The man who had once wielded his wealth like a weapon was now without the very power that had defined him. "What will happen to his horses?" Sophia asked, the caretaker in her immediately concerned for the animals' welfare. "That's what I wanted to tell you," Tomas continued. "They're being auctioned off next week. Many are being sold to work in mines or to slaughterhouses. The buyers don't care about their breeding or their past, they're just looking for strong backs or quick profit." Sophia felt a knot form in her stomach. Despite everything Harold had done, the thought of his horses, animals that had once been pampered and showcased, now facing such grim fates, disturbed her deeply. "We have to do something," she said, rising to her feet. "We can't save them all, but perhaps we can help some." In the days that followed, Sophia gathered what resources she could. The sanctuary's funds were limited, mostly reliant on donations and the small income from selling handmade goods at the local market. Still, with contributions from community members who remembered their own stand against Harold, they managed to pool together enough for perhaps saving 1 or 2 horses. The auction was held at what remained of Harold's once magnificent estate. The main house stood empty, windows shuttered, the manicured lawns now overgrown. The stables, once gleaming showcases of wealth, appeared neglected after just months without proper care. Sophia, accompanied by Tomas and a few others from the community, felt oddly out of place among the buyers, mostly work farm owners, mining company representatives, and a few meat buyers evaluating the horses with cold, calculating eyes. As they walked through the stables, Sophia's heart ached for the animals. Many looked confused, sensing the upheaval around them. These were horses accustomed to the finest care, now facing uncertain futures with owners who might see them merely as tools. And then, at the end of one row, Sophia stopped in her tracks. There, in a stall slightly apart from the others, stood a horse whose appearance made her breath catch. He was the spitting image of Thunder in his younger days. Same powerful build, same intelligent eyes, though his coat was a warmer chestnut rather than Thunder's deeper shade. "It can't be," she whispered. A stable hand passing by noticed her interest. "That's Bolt, Blackwood's last champion. Son of Thunder, his old prize stallion. Got the same spirit as his sire, they say. Too bad he's likely headed for hard labor. He's got the strength for it." Sophia approached the stall slowly. Bolt watched her with cautious eyes, his ears flicking forward with interest rather than fear. When she extended her hand, he sniffed it curiously before pressing his muzzle against her palm, a gesture so reminiscent of Thunder that tears sprang to Sophia's eyes. "How much?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the horse. "More than we brought," Tomas said quietly. "He'll go to the highest bidder." When the auction began, Sophia stood nervously among the crowd. She bid what she could for Bolt, but as expected, the price quickly climbed beyond her means. A representative from a mining company was the most aggressive bidder, eyeing Bolt's strong frame with practical interest. Just as the auctioneer was about to close the bidding, a commotion at the back of the crowd drew everyone's attention. A figure pushed through, tall and gaunt, dressed in clothes that had once been fine but now showed signs of wear. Harold Blackwood, a shadow of his former imposing self, approached the auction platform. His face was lined with new creases, his shoulders stooped under the weight of his fall from grace. But his eyes still held that same intensity as he surveyed the crowd, his gaze finally landing on Sophia. For a moment, the years seemed to fall away, and they were once again adversaries facing off across Sophia's humble ranch. But something had changed in Harold's expression. The arrogance had been replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Stop the bidding," he said, his voice still carrying the authority of a man once accustomed to being obeyed. "That horse is not for sale." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The auctioneer looked confused. "Sir, the bank has authorized the sale of all animals on the property." "Not this one," Harold insisted. "Bolt is the last of Thunder's line, and he belongs with someone who will appreciate that legacy." He turned to Sophia, and to her astonishment, nodded slightly. "You were right," he said, the words clearly difficult for a man of his pride. "Some things can't be bought and sold. Some things deserve better than to be treated as mere property." A hush fell over the crowd. The auctioneer, bewildered by this unexpected turn of events, looked from Harold to the bank representative who stood nearby. The representative stepped forward, speaking in a low voice. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your attachment, but the bank's position is clear. All assets must be liquidated to cover outstanding debts." Harold's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Sophia stepped forward. The years had given her a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. "What if I make an offer?" she asked. "Not for auction, but a private sale of just this one horse." The bank representative adjusted his glasses, studying Sophia with mild interest. "And who might you be, miss?" "Sophia Martinez. I run the animal sanctuary in Valle del Sol." She didn't mention her history with Harold, but the older locals in the crowd exchanged knowing glances. After a brief consultation with colleagues, the representative nodded reluctantly. "If you can match the highest bid placed so far, we might consider it. The bank simply needs to recover value, not specifically through auction." Sophia's heart sank. The highest bid was still well beyond what she and her neighbors had managed to gather. She looked at Bolt, seeing in him not just Thunder's legacy, but a reflection of that day by the stream years ago when she'd found an abandoned, injured horse who needed her. "I don't have that much," she admitted honestly. Harold, who had been watching this exchange in silence, cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. "I still have one thing of value," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a gold pocket watch with an intricately engraved case. "This was my father's, the one thing I couldn't bring myself to sell, even at my lowest. It should cover the difference." He held it out not to the bank representative but to Sophia. The gesture carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words: apology, respect, perhaps even a plea for redemption. Sophia looked at the watch, then at Harold's face. She saw none of the arrogance that had once defined him, only the humility of a man who had lost everything except, perhaps, his humanity. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you help me now?" Harold's gaze drifted to Bolt. "Because you were right about Thunder, about all of it. I treated him like a machine, an investment. When he could no longer perform, I discarded him without a thought." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "I've had a lot of time to think about the kind of man I became. I don't expect forgiveness, but I can at least try to do one right thing." Sophia accepted the watch, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic, in her palm. With Harold's contribution, They had enough to secure Bolt's future. As the paperwork was being processed, Sophia approached Bolt's stall again. The horse regarded her with that same intelligent curiosity she had first seen in Thunder. She extended her hand, and he pressed his muzzle against it, blowing softly. "You're coming home with us," she told him. "There's someone I think you should meet." 2 hours later, a small procession made its way down the dusty road toward Sophia's sanctuary. Sophia led Bolt by a rope halter, talking softly to him as they walked. Tomas and the others followed, still processing the unexpected events of the day. And behind them all, to everyone's surprise, came Harold Blackwood, walking alone, his once imposing figure now humbled but somehow more human. As they approached the sanctuary, Thunder, who had been grazing in a front paddock, raised his head. His ears pricked forward as he caught sight, or perhaps the scent, of the approaching group. When his eyes fell on Bolt, he went completely still, as if time itself had stopped. Sophia opened the gate to Thunder's paddock and carefully led Bolt inside. The two horses regarded each other across the space, father and son, separated by years and circumstances, now face to face. Thunder moved first, approaching with the careful, slightly halting gait that his old injury still caused. Bolt remained where he was, but his ears swiveled forward, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scent of his sire. When they were just a few feet apart, Thunder stretched out his neck and Bolt mirrored the gesture. Their muzzles touched in a gentle greeting that spoke of recognition beyond human understanding. "They know," Tomas whispered, standing beside Sophia at the fence. "Somehow, they know their family." Sophia nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in her throat. She felt a presence beside her and turned to find Harold watching the horses, moisture gathering in the corners of his eyes. "I never saw it before," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The way they feel, the way they connect. To me, they were just property," Sophia finished for him, but without bitterness. "But they've always been more than that." Harold nodded slowly. "When I lost everything, I realized how I'd measured my whole life in possessions. Horses, land, trophies, money. But none of it meant anything in the end. None of it stood by me when I fell." Sophia looked at him, really looked at the man who had once been her adversary. "What will you do now?" Harold shrugged, a gesture that would have been unthinkable for the proud man he once was. "I don't know. Start over somehow, if that's even possible at my age." An idea began to form in Sophia's mind as she watched Thunder and Bolt walking side by side, the older horse seemingly showing his son around the paddock. "We always need help at the sanctuary," she said carefully. "Many of these animals require special care, especially the older ones. Someone with knowledge of horses would be valuable." Harold looked at her with surprise. "You would offer me that? After everything?" "Not for you," Sophia clarified. "For them." She nodded toward the horses. "And maybe for both of us, to heal old wounds." Word spread quickly through the community about Harold Blackwood's return and the unexpected turn of events. Many were skeptical, even angry, remembering the arrogant businessman who had tried to bully Sophia years before. Some warned her against trusting him, fearing his change of heart was merely a ploy. But Sophia held firm. "Everyone deserves a chance to change," she told the concerned neighbors who gathered at her door. "I believe in second chances. That's what this sanctuary was built on." As the weeks passed, Harold became a familiar figure at the sanctuary. He arrived early each morning, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. The fine suits were gone, replaced by practical work clothes. He mucked stalls, groomed horses, and helped repair fencing alongside those who had once stood against him. He spoke little, but his actions, his gentle handling of the animals, his willingness to take on the hardest tasks without complaint, gradually began to shift perceptions. Thunder, remarkably, seemed to accept Harold's presence with equanimity. The horse that had once fled from him now allowed the man to approach, to stroke his neck, even to check his old injury with careful hands. 1 year passed, then another. The sanctuary continued to grow, not in grandeur, but in purpose. What had begun with Sophia's rescue of an abandoned horse had evolved into a place of healing for animals and humans alike. People from neighboring communities brought injured wildlife, abandoned pets, and work animals too old to serve their original purposes. No creature was turned away, each finding its place in the gentle rhythm of sanctuary life. Harold's presence had become as natural as the changing seasons. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with imperious authority now sat on weathered fence posts, patiently teaching local children how to approach nervous horses. His knowledge of equine bloodlines and care proved invaluable, especially for the more traumatized animals that arrived at their gates. On a warm spring morning, Sophia found Harold in Thunder's paddock, where the old horse now spent his days with Bolt, never far from his side. The two horses had formed an inseparable bond, the younger often standing protectively near his sire when Thunder's old injury troubled him in cold weather. "They're quite the pair," Sophia said, leaning against the fence. Harold nodded, a small smile softening his once stern features. "Father and son. I've been thinking about them a lot lately." He paused, running a weathered hand along Thunder's neck. About how differently things might have turned out. Sophia studied him, noting how the past 2 years had changed him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet dignity that suited him better than his former pride ever had. "You know," Harold continued, "all those years ago, when I ordered my men to get rid of Thunder after his injury, I thought I was just making a business decision, cutting losses." He shook his head. "I never considered that I was throwing away something irreplaceable." "What changed you?" Sophia asked, the question she had wondered but never voiced. Harold was quiet for a long moment. "When you lose everything, you see clearly what matters. After the bankruptcy, people I'd dined with, made deals with for decades, they wouldn't even take my calls." His gaze drifted to Thunder and Bolt. "But watching you, this sanctuary, how everyone rallied around a cause greater than themselves, I realized I'd spent my life accumulating things that had no real value." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and distant laughter of children helping with morning chores. "I received a letter yesterday," Harold finally said, "from a former business associate. He's offering me a position managing his stables in the capital. Good salary, prestigious clientele." Sophia felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. "Will you take it?" Harold turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "A few years ago I wouldn't have hesitated. Status, money, power, it would have been everything I wanted." He smiled, the gesture transforming his face. "But now, I find I'm more at home here, mucking stalls and teaching children than I ever was in that world." Relief washed over Sophia, though she tried not to show it. The sanctuary had become whole with his presence, his expertise, and perhaps most importantly, his journey toward redemption. That evening, as golden light bathed the sanctuary, Sophia organized a small gathering to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of the day they had stood together against Harold Blackwood, though now, ironically, with Harold himself among them. Tables were arranged under the old oak tree, laden with dishes contributed by neighbors. Children darted between adults, their laughter carrying across the paddocks. Sophia called for everyone's attention, standing on a wooden crate to be seen. 3 years ago, we came together to defend something important, not just a horse, but the principle that the strongest among us shouldn't simply take what they want from the weakest." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some of the older villagers glanced at Harold, who stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. What we didn't know then, Sophia continued, was that we weren't just saving Thunder. We were creating something that would grow beyond any of us. She gestured to the sanctuary around them. This place has become a refuge not just for animals, but for our community. A place where value isn't measured in money, but in compassion. Sophia's gaze found Harold. And we've learned that people, like animals, can surprise us. They can change, heal, and find new purpose. She raised her glass. To second chances for all of God's creatures. The toast was echoed warmly, and as conversations resumed, Sophia noticed Harold slip away from the celebration, heading toward the far paddock where Thunder and Bolt were kept. Curious, she followed at a distance. She found him leaning against the fence, watching the two horses in the fading light. Thunder had his head resting over Bolt's withers, a position of trust and affection. The older horse's injured leg seemed to be troubling him less these days, as if his son's presence somehow eased the old pain. "They remind me of what might have been," Harold said without turning, somehow sensing Sophia's presence. "If I had been a different kind of father to my own son." Sophia hadn't known Harold had a child. In all their time working together, he had never mentioned family. "We haven't spoken in 15 years, Harold continued, answering her unasked question. "Another casualty of my pride. Alexander wanted to be an artist, not a businessman. I told him he was throwing his life away, that no son of mine would waste his potential on dreams." He sighed deeply. "I was so certain I knew what was valuable." Sophia moved to stand beside him. "It's never too late, you know, for second chances." Harold nodded slowly. "I wrote to him last week, told him about this place, about what I've learned. I don't know if he'll respond, but..." He trailed off, watching as Bolt gently nudged his father toward the water trough. "He will," Sophia said with quiet certainty, "because that's what this place teaches us. The heart always knows the way home." As darkness settled over the sanctuary, stars emerged one by one, illuminating the peaceful scene below. In the paddock, Thunder and Bolt stood side by side, two generations united after years apart. In their silent companionship lay the story of the sanctuary itself, how rescue becomes restoration, how loss transforms into legacy. Sophia and Harold walked back toward the celebration, where lanterns now twinkled like earthbound stars. Around them, the sanctuary continued its quiet work of healing, a testament to how one act of compassion can ripple outward, changing lives in ways never imagined. Years ago, Sophia had found an abandoned horse by a stream and made a simple promise: "You won't be alone." She couldn't have known then how that promise would expand to embrace not just Thunder, but an entire community, and even the man who had once been her greatest adversary. As Thunder's soft whinny carried through the evening air, Sophia smiled. Some might call what had happened a miracle, but she knew better. It was simply what occurred when courage met compassion, when the heart refused to surrender to fear or greed. It was the story of Thunder and Bolt, of Sophia and Harold, and of a humble sanctuary that had become, for all of them, the truest definition of home.